Halloween night, a night of masks, ghosts, and untold stories. But some stories aren't legends. They are terrifying truths lost in the shadows. A young girl was murdered, her identity unknown, her name forgotten by all. Her body was found by the roadside, but the mystery of Jane Doe lingers on. This is the story of the haunting of Halloween night, where the ghosts of the past still haunt and never truly fade away. Chapter 1. The Stranger in the Night. Halloween 1980. A cold and heavy darkness settled over Walker County, Texas. On the deserted highway, the sparse streetlights barely pierced the gloom. Thick fog blanketed the road, and the wind howling through the trees along the roadside created eerie, indistinct sounds like the breathing of something unseen. At the edge of town, a few locals noticed a young girl, looking lost and alone, walking along the path. It was the night of masks and costumes, but this girl wore no mask. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant, as if lost in a world no one could reach. She wasn't part of the festive crowd, laughing and celebrating. Instead, she wandered, asking for directions to the Ellis prison. "I need to meet a friend," she said, her voice soft yet chilling to the bone. Those who encountered her recalled a shiver running down their spines when they pointed her toward the prison. There was something off about her, something they couldn't place. Some found themselves glancing over their shoulders, half expecting her to disappear like a ghost. But she remained, slowly moving forward, as if guided by an invisible force. The girl kept walking, her small feet crunching over gravel, sometimes straying from the path and then returning without hesitation. The air around her seemed to shift, growing heavier, more mysterious, but no one dared follow her or ask further about the mysterious friend she sought. Everyone felt that behind her faint smile lay something much darker. That Halloween night, Walker County was filled with children in witch costumes and ghoulish attire, running and playing, but none of them had eyes like that girl's. Her eyes seemed dead. She wasn't looking for fun, candy, or the usual pranks of the holiday. She was searching for something else, something unknown, something no one could understand. As midnight neared, and the last few cars drove down the highway, the girl continued her journey. Her shadow stretched across the asphalt, elongated in the dim headlights of passing cars. A driver stopped, rolled down his window, and asked if she needed help, but when the car's lights illuminated her face, he froze. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just stared at him with hollow eyes. A wave of irrational fear swept over the driver, and he sped off without looking back. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next morning, the sky was still gray, and the weak rays of sunlight did nothing to dispel the lingering chill of that November morning. A man driving along the familiar stretch of highway noticed something by the roadside. At first, he thought it was a discarded pile of clothes, but as he stopped, a cold dread washed over him. The lifeless body of a young girl lay beside the road, her face pale and her eyes wide open, void of any light. Her clothes were wrinkled and torn, her body battered by a brutal force, and around her neck was the deep imprint of an invisible rope, one that had cruelly stolen her life in the dark of night. The police arrived, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the grim scene. There was no ID, no clear clues. The girl, like so many other nameless victims, became Jane Doe, a ghost with no name in the police records. But the strangest detail had yet to emerge. In her jacket pocket, they found a small, crumpled piece of paper with scrawled handwriting. "I have to meet my friend at Ellis." But no one knew who this friend was, or why she had to pay with her life just to meet him. Chapter 2. The Body by the Road. The dim light of dawn fell over Walker County Highway, but it couldn't chase away the chilling aura that lingered. The sound of police sirens pierced through the damp air of the early November morning. A crowd of onlookers gathered from a distance, watching as the young girl's body was taken away, her face still etched with the final marks of terror. Some whispered that it was the first time they had seen such a scene. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't the first time dark things had happened in Walker County. The police quickly cordoned off the scene. They searched for clues, anything that could help identify the young girl. But all they found was emptiness. She had no wallet, no identification, no name, a nameless Jane Doe. That title, like a scar, would be stamped on police records, eventually to be forgotten in the archives. But there was something different about this girl. Everything about her, from how she appeared to how she was killed, made people uneasy. At the investigation meeting, the sheriff entered, his face lined with the weight of heavy thoughts. "She's not from around here," he said, his voice heavy in the quiet room. "No one in town recognizes her, and that makes this all the more unsettling." A young officer stood up, placing a small piece of paper on the table, found in the victim's pocket. The note raised more questions than it answered. "I have to meet my friend at Ellis." Who was this friend? Why was she heading to Ellis Prison on Halloween night? None of the prisoners at Ellis recognized the girl. They all denied any connection to her. And as the police dug deeper, they discovered that no prison visit had been scheduled on the night she was killed. No phone calls, no letters. There was no trace that she had been seeking someone. Yet, that note remained in her pocket, a faint marker of some terrible truth. While investigators hit a dead end, rumors began to spread in the small town of Walker County. Those who had seen the girl on Halloween night recalled the unusual coldness in her eyes, as though she was looking through them, not at them. One man, who worked at a nearby gas station, remembered that she had stopped in to ask for directions around 9 p.m. She wasn't like the kids trick-or-treating or the adults out celebrating. She looked like she was running from something, or like something was following her, he recalled, his voice still trembling slightly. But there was one strange detail he hadn't shared with the police. He remembered that when the girl walked into the gas station, she glanced at the rearview mirror behind the counter. But she wasn't looking at herself. It was as if she was watching someone or something standing behind her. He hadn't seen anyone, but it was clear that she had. Meanwhile, the dreams of Jane Doe began to haunt a young investigator named Tom, who couldn't shake the hollow look in her eyes. Every night, he dreamt of the girl standing by the side of the highway, staring blankly into the darkness. In the dreams, she never spoke, just stood there. And once, Tom saw a tall, dark figure standing behind her, its shape unclear, but carrying a threatening, ominous presence. The figure seemed to want to pull her into the shadows forever, but she stood her ground, as if waiting for something. Tom began to sense that there was something left unexplored, something beyond the girl's death, something larger and darker that cast its shadow over the town. He couldn't shake the feeling that the friend she was seeking played a role in her tragic fate. But who was this friend, and why had she been so desperate to reach Ellis? Tom decided to return to the spot where her body had been found, hoping to uncover more clues. He walked along the desolate highway, with the occasional truck passing by, sending cold gusts of wind his way. Standing where the girl had been discovered, he scanned the area, trying to sense something, any trace, a spirit, or simply a sign of something unusual. Then, just as Tom was about to turn away, he heard a soft whisper in the wind. "Ellis." He spun around, but no one was there. Only the dead silence remained, as if the very place was hiding something. Chapter 3, Rumors About the Friend. Night had fallen over Walker County, and the dim yellow lights from scattered windows in the town weren't enough to chase away the thick darkness that blanketed every corner. The story of Jane Doe began spreading like a ghostly whisper, haunting the minds of the townspeople. Everyone knew of the young girl, but no one knew who she was. And the question about the friend she was seeking at Ellis Prison became an unsettling mystery. At a small bar on the outskirts of town, men sat together, sipping cold beer and talking about Jane Doe. Some recalled strange faces they had seen on Halloween night. People who weren't from Walker County. They talked about old stories, forgotten spirits, and faceless figures. But one story made the entire room fall silent. An old man named Earl, his voice rough from years of smoking and drinking, sat in the corner of the bar. He chuckled quietly when he heard talk about Jane Doe looking for a friend at Ellis Prison. "You all don't know a thing," Earl said, his voice like a whisper mixed with the devil's own. "Ellis is not just prisoners there. There are spirits, lost souls trapped in this world that can never break free. The people around him turned to listen. A strange silence filled the bar. A curious young man asked, "What do you mean? Earl? Who was she looking for?" Earl squinted, as if he was seeing something no one else could. "She was looking for someone who's no longer alive. Boys, Ellis Prison, it's not just a place for criminals. It holds the forgotten dead, the ones who still wander in the darkness. I've heard stories about a killer who was executed years ago. He murdered a bunch of young girls around here, and some say, even after death, he's still around at Ellis." Earl's story made the atmosphere in the bar feel suffocating. Some laughed it off, thinking it was just a horror tale meant to spook them. But deep down, everyone felt something wasn't right. They started remembering strange events that had happened at Ellis, prisoners' dreams of ghosts, the cries in the night of inmates claiming they saw something moving in the shadows. Tom, the young investigator, heard Earl's story and couldn't ignore it. As far-fetched as it seemed, it held a grain of truth. Maybe the friend Jane Doe was searching for wasn't alive. Tom wasn't a superstitious man, but the dreams of the girl had made him reconsider. That night, Tom decided to visit Ellis Prison, where Jane Doe's spirit seemed bound to something she hadn't yet been freed from. Ellis stood tall in the desolate landscape. Its high, thick walls like a fortress, holding not just people, but the darkest secrets of this world. Tom entered the prison's administrative area, where old records of long-dead criminals were kept. He began going through the files, hoping to find a lead. And then, one name made him stop: Lester Buchanan, a brutal serial killer executed in 1975. He had murdered at least 6 young girls in horrifying crimes that spanned several years. The brutality of his attacks, the violence, it all eerily mirrored what had happened to Jane Doe. Lester Buchanan had been caught and brought to Ellis, where he was executed in the electric chair. But the file recorded his final words, and reading them sent a chill through Tom. Lester had smiled as he was strapped to the chair, and just before the electricity surged through his body, he had said, "You can kill me, but I'll never really leave. I'll still be here, in the dark, waiting." Tom felt a cold wave wash over him as he read those words. Lester was dead, but maybe his spirit still lingered at Ellis. And maybe Jane Doe had come to meet someone she believed was her friend, or the one who had manipulated her into a deadly fate. That night, Tom decided to return to the spot where Jane Doe's body had been found. Standing by the side of the highway in the thick darkness, he looked out toward the faint, distant glow of passing lights. The air was eerily still. Suddenly, a chilling gust of wind swept past, and for a brief moment, he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. He spun around. There was no one there, but he could feel something, a presence he couldn't see, but one that was there, lurking in the shadows. Chapter 4: Jane Doe's Dark Past. The long nights in Walker County seemed to grow darker and more oppressive since the story of Jane Doe began circulating. The darkness didn't just cover the town. It seeped into the minds of those who had heard the rumors about the nameless girl. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of his control, with the name Lester Buchanan emerging as a key piece of the puzzle. Tom decided to dig deeper into his life. Something told him that Jane Doe wasn't just a random victim. She had known Lester, or had been pulled into his dark world. Tom found a lead in some old records from a small town about 50 miles from Walker County. A young girl, whose description closely matched that of Jane Doe, had once lived there, but had suddenly disappeared. No one in her family or among her friends could remember exactly when she had gone missing, as if she had been erased from their memories. One name echoed in Tom's mind: Amanda Fields. She could very well be Jane Doe, the nameless victim found on the roadside. Tom decided to visit that town, now a nearly forgotten place of abandoned houses and elderly residents who could barely recall the events of the past. Upon arriving, he started looking into the Fields family, who had once lived in an old, decrepit house on the outskirts of town. The house was now abandoned, but locals still whispered about the eerie events that had once taken place there. Children avoided the area, and the townsfolk swore that on rainy nights, They could hear crying coming from the old house. Standing before the house, Tom felt his heart race as the dim beam of his flashlight illuminated the cracked walls, the shattered windows, peeling paint, and the air of death around the house filled him with dread. He stepped inside, the creaking floorboards echoing in the silence. Each step a reminder that this place had been forgotten for a long time. Inside, the house still seemed to hold traces of life. Rotting furniture, dust-covered photographs. But what made Tom's skin crawl was a family photo lying discarded on the floor. He bent down to pick it up, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw the face of the girl in the picture. It was Jane Doe, there was no doubt. Her face, her eyes, it was Amanda Fields, and she had lived here before she vanished without a trace. Tom started sifting through decaying journals, old newspapers, and records of Lester Buchanan's crimes. Buchanan had passed through this town years before his arrest. Rumors had circulated that he had targeted several young girls, but the police had never found those girls. All they knew was that Lester had once lived in the area, and it seemed he had marked Amanda Fields, Jane Doe, as his next victim. But the question remained, why did Jane come to Ellis? Was her soul still under Lester's control, even after his death? At the same time, Tom's dreams became more vivid and terrifying. In his dreams, he saw Jane Amanda standing on the edge of a cliff, with dark, shapeless figures below, trying to pull her down. She tried to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. And always, in the darkness, there was a shadowy figure watching, waiting. Tom woke up in a cold sweat. The images from his dreams felt like a warning, telling him that there was something far more sinister at play than just a past crime. Lester Buchanan wasn't just a killer. He had left a dark mark on his victims, a mark that couldn't be erased, even in death. Determined not to let the case fade into obscurity, Tom returned to Ellis Prison. This time, he wasn't just searching through records. He was prepared to confront whatever had been haunting him in his dreams. He entered the execution chamber where Lester had been put to death years ago. The room remained as it had been, a grim reminder of the horrors witnessed there. Standing in the darkened room, Tom took deep breaths to steady himself, but the air around him felt heavier, as if something was pressing down. Then, from the shadows, a soft whisper broke the silence. "You can't save her." Tom spun around, but there was no one there. His flashlight flickered, but Tom knew that something or someone was there, watching him. As Tom left the prison, he felt like every step he took was being tracked. He knew that Jane Doe's life, Amanda Fields' life, had been intertwined with Lester Buchanan in ways that defied explanation. Her soul was still trapped, unable to break free, and it seemed that this would never end until the final secret was uncovered. But what was that secret? And would Tom have the courage to face the terrifying truth he was about to discover? Chapter 5. The Final Night. The sky was pitch black, starless, like an endless curtain enveloping Walker County. The highway lights flickered faintly, isolated in the barren landscape. That night, Tom knew everything was coming to an end. Something dark was waiting, and he could feel its presence, a shadow lurking just beyond the edge of the light, biding its time to reveal itself. Tom stood in front of Ellis Prison, where Lester Buchanan had once lived and died, and where he believed the killer's ghost still lingered. But tonight, Tom wasn't here to search for files or clues. Tonight, he was here to confront what the world had long forgotten. In his hand was a photo of Amanda Fields, Jane Doe, and an old journal he had found in her abandoned house. The brittle pages seemed to hold horrors that were never meant to be read. The final entries of the journal recounted Amanda's recurring dream, where she was always pulled down by Lester, unable to escape. She wrote of feeling watched, of hearing footsteps at night, and of a fear she could never fully describe. And then, she vanished. Tom knew Amanda's soul was trapped between two worlds, dragged down by Lester, just as he had done to all his victims. And tonight, Tom would have to do what no one had ever dared: face the entity of Lester Buchanan and free Amanda. Tom walked through the gates of Ellis Prison. The silence was so thick it felt as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something dreadful to unfold. The old brick walls echoed with his footsteps. Tonight wasn't like any other night. Tonight, Ellis carried a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. He reached the execution chamber, where Lester had been killed in the electric chair. The years had gathered dust in the room, but everything remained just as it had been on the day of Lester's death. Tom placed Amanda's picture on the chair where Lester had once sat and began reading from the final pages of her journal. As he read, the room seemed to grow colder, the howling wind outside morphing into distant, ghostly moans. The darkness in the room seemed to move, pulsing with each word Tom spoke. He knew Lester was here. He could feel the killer's presence, something unseen but undeniably real, watching him from the shadows. "You can't save her," the familiar whisper echoed, louder and clearer than ever before. Tom stopped but didn't dare turn around. He knew that one wrong move would give Lester the chance to claim him, just as he had done with Amanda. "She belongs to me," the voice growled, taunting and ominous. Tom swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't let Lester control the game. He continued reading, his voice trembling in the cold air. But each word, each sentence, felt like a blade cutting through the darkness. Then, before Tom's eyes, Lester's shadow began to take form, not as a physical body, but as a spectral figure, swirling like smoke, with eyes burning red with hatred. He laughed, the twisted grin of a man who was dead, but still had the power to haunt. He stepped closer to Tom, each movement heavy with the weight of death. "You think you can save her?" Lester sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "You'll end up like all the others." Tom took a deep breath, and with every ounce of courage he had left, he shouted, "You're dead, Lester. You have no power here anymore." Tom's words echoed through the room, shaking the very air. Lester's shadow paused, his red eyes glowing brighter before slowly fading. Tom's voice grew stronger as he continued reading, more resolute with each word. Every sentence was a blow to Lester's dark form, causing the shadow to dissipate into the air. But just as Tom thought it was over, Lester's shadow condensed into a smaller, denser figure, and from it, another shape emerged, Amanda Fields, but no longer the soul Tom had seen in his dreams. She stood there with empty, hollow eyes, overtaken by Lester's darkness. Her spirit had been corrupted, twisted into part of his shadow. "Save her!" Tom shouted desperately, but Amanda only stared at him, silent and emotionless. Tom realized there was no other way. He had to break the cycle right here, right now. He lit Amanda's journal on the electric chair, letting the flames consume the horrifying memories that had bound her to Lester. The fire blazed brightly, and in that moment, Tom saw Lester's shadow vanish completely, taking Amanda's soul with it. The whispers were gone. The shadows had disappeared. All that remained was Tom, standing in the cold room as the final flicker of the fire died out. Amanda had been freed, but the price had been everything she once was, even the memory of her. Tom looked out the window, the sky still cloaked in darkness, but the air felt lighter now. Lester was gone forever. As Tom left Ellis Prison, he knew no one would remember Jane Doe. No one would remember Amanda Fields, but he would never forget. He had saved her, but her soul had become a part of the darkness forever. Walker County would never know who the girl was. She would remain Jane Doe, the silent ghost of Halloween night. And so, the ghost of Jane Doe has been freed, but the price was oblivion. No one remembers her name, and no one searches for her anymore. She will forever be an unnamed spirit, part of the unsolved mysteries of Halloween night. But while this story has come to an end, never forget that the darkness always holds its own secrets. Are you sure that on the next Halloween night, you won't hear whispers from the shadows? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales. And make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a thing. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next horror story. But be careful, because Halloween night never truly ends.